Welcome back to another fly tying episode. Today I will be tying up one of my absolute favorite dry flies to fish. I call this one the Emerging Dun Hexagenia. This is a versatile pattern because it covers multiple life stages of the Hexagenia. It is tied here with a light color scheme suggestive of an early stage hex because they darken as they mature into spinners. So when thrown as a dry, this pattern looks like a dun, but the fly is also very effective stripped and twitched. The first part of the fly, to lose buoyancy and fall below the water column as you strip it, is the rear, leaving the top half of the fly still on the water's surface. Now the fly is more suggestive of an emerger or even a cripple, and trout see this as an easy meal. Alright, so let's get started. The first thing that I'm going to grab is a size 4 hopper hook. This is 2 extra heavy, 3 extra long. This fly is intended to ride upside down. I'm going to put a few extra bends in the hook. I'm going to grab my needle nose pliers and make a bend about 1/4 of the way up the hook shank from the eye. And I'm going to make my second bend at the hook eye. I'm just going to get a slight angle on that quarter bend and then just straighten out the eye here so it's going straight with the hook. And it should look something like this. Alright, so the next material that I'm going to need is thread. For this pattern I like to use a Danville's waxed monocord. This is a size 3/0. And I like this in yellow. Fairly important to use the yellow as a rib since this is a Hexagenia. You could use a brown as well. Would look pretty good and realistic, but I like to use yellow. Alright, so I'm going to start by winding this on at the hook eye. I'm going to make a nice base of thread down the entire shank here. This monocord is waxed, so that's just going to help, especially on that bend, so that my materials don't slip down into the eye as easily. And I'll come in with my scissors, snip this tag off, take a few more turns down, just past the barb of the hook here. Now I'm going to come in with the next material. This is some deer body hair. If you guys are hunters, I recommend you give it a shot and try doing it yourself. Just cut off a few select pieces and get some salt and tack it to a board. Really, it's just that simple. Okay, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to snip off a clump of the deer body hair as close to the hide as I can. Now I'm going to take and thin out all this fluffy stuff here. Just get all this out of there. And now I'm going to set the clump inside of a hair stacker so that the tail comes out neatly. Give it a good smashing on the table here. Alright, I've got these tips evened out nice. Just going to come in, pinch it, make sure my thread is at the rear. And just tie this in, one loose wrap over the top, another one, and there's 3. Now what I'm going to do is take my 4th wrap and apply a little bit of pressure, not as much as possible. And now I'm going to pull the deer hair upwards and take open spiral wraps towards the hook eye. Be careful not to trap any stray hairs there. Now come in and lightly pull your deer hair forward. Take 2 wraps over the top. Now I'm going to take some open spiral wraps back down towards the rear of the fly. Applying light pressure. If you apply too much pressure, you'll split the deer hair right in half. So just a nice, light, moderate amount of pressure here. Excuse me. And then right back up, open spiral wraps. Now you've got a nice little crisscross pattern here. And now what I'll do is pull all the deer hair butts up in the air and take some wraps forward. I'm going to grab my scissors, come in and snip off all that hair. Clean this up a little bit. And now come in with the thread and just bite into all this deer hair and bind it down. I want to make a nice smooth base to wrap my hackle on. So now I'm going to grab my hackle. This is a Metz dry fly cape. It is a light ginger. So I'm going to use the thickest feathers all the way here at this end. The biggest, longest fibers. This is probably the largest mayfly we have in this state, so it's going to get a generous collar. So I'll rip off a few feathers here. Snip off or pull away the fluff here from the bottom. Sometimes I like to come in and just pinch a little bit extra off one side. Just like that. And then I can wrap that bare stem part in first. Just makes it a little bit neater. So just take some turns, bind this down, come in and snip the stem off. Make sure the stem's secured. And get your thread down here out of the way. And start wrapping this, and now I'll start wrapping this hackle. So I'm just palmering this, taking my fingers and pulling all the fibers back. Getting those stem wraps to touch. See how I'm taking my fingers and just pulling the fibers backwards out of the way every turn. And using my fingers to twist on the bottom so I don't have to let go. Now I'll just come in with my thread and take a couple of turns over the hackle here, over the tip of the feather. Now it's secure, so I can come in and snip it off. And I'll snip those extra fibers off as well. Alright, so now I'm going to tie in two wings. I'm going to use a dark brown as opposed to this light ginger. Doesn't really matter what color you use. You could even use a grizzly or anything. But I do like to have a contrasting color, not the same as the hackle. Alright, so I'll bring my thread back up to where I stopped wrapping the hackle. And now I'm going to grab my brown wing. You guys can see that there's a curve to this wing. I want this to curve outwards, not inwards. And I want it to be about the length of the hook, but not extending past the tail. So I'm just going to set this in, take a couple turns over the top, adjust it if necessary. So now I'll come in with my scissors and I'll snip this off. And I'm going to grab my wing for the other side and do the same thing, curving out about the length of the hook. A few turns over the top here. And make sure it's setting right. Mine is. So I'm going to come in with my scissors and snip this butt end here. Clean up the head a little bit. And you guys can see the profile starting to take shape here. Now I'm just taking some tight turns to bind those wings in and to level out the rest of the hook shank, because I'm going to grab another ginger feather here and tie this in right now. Same thing. Strip the fluff off the bottom. and tie it in. Come in with my scissors, snip this butt end off, and start wrapping the final hackle. Keep pulling the fibers backwards as you wrap so you don't pinch them and trap them in. Now I'm just going to pull all these fibers back as I wrap the head. I'll grab my whip finishing tool and throw a couple nice neat whip finishes in. There's one. And there's two. And I'll just snip away a couple of these fibers that are sticking out. Come in with some head cement here. Be careful not to touch the hackle, just the head. And now I'll flip it upside down, because it should ride something like this. Definitely a fun pattern to fish. The Hexagenia hatch starts in the early summer in my area, usually mid to late June. Hexes can be found on most lakes and ponds, but favor areas with muddy bottoms. They can also be found in rivers along a select few sections with the slower still water and muddy bottoms. These mayflies start hatching as the sun sets and continue all night. Rising fish can be heard all around. It is a really exciting experience and one you definitely would not forget once you witness it for yourself. I certainly cherish my memories of fishing the hex hatch. Always a good time. Alright guys, I hope you learned something in this video. I hope it inspired you to tie up some flies or go out fishing. Alright guys, tight lines. Catch you next time.